In this session of our online conference, we will discuss the situation of human rights in Iran, the trip by European dignitaries to Iran, and its impact on the behavior of the Iranian regime and the correct attitude and policy. As you know, following the election of Hassan Rouhani in 2013, some in the West advocated that things will change in Iran and there will be improvements in human rights situation in Iran. This idea was intensified after the nuclear deal between the world powers and Iran last July. This notion was particularly advocated by those who basically followed by an appeasement policy and wanted a softer policy with Iran so deals can be made with Iran. But the reality was proven to be totally different. There has been almost 2,400 executions during Rouhani's presidency. According to the UN Special Reporter on Iran, there were more executions in Iran in 2015 compared to any other year than in the past 25 years. According to Amnesty International, there were almost 1,000 executions in Iran in 2015, including women and those who were teenager offenders. According to Amnesty International, the Iranian regime was the #1 executioner in the world in 2015 per capita. In the meantime, after nuclear agreements, a number of European dignitaries and senior officials have visited Iran and have with the Iranian regime's leaders. The question is, what impact these trips have had on the activities of Iranian regime, particularly on the issue of human rights? And what is the correct attitude on the West on human rights in dealing with the Iranian regime? Our guests for these discussions are experts on these issues. Ambassador Giulio Terzi, the former foreign minister of Italy and one of the most prominent Italian diplomats, and Elisabetta Zamparutti, a famous human rights advocate from Hands of Cain Human Rights Organization and former member of Italian Parliament. Let me welcome both of you to our discussion today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you to discuss this issue.
Thank you.
Ms. Zamparutti, Amnesty International reported that Iran had the highest number of executions per capita globally in 2015. How do you and the Hands of Cain assess the human rights situation in Iran under Rouhani?
The situation of human rights under the Rouhani presidency is worsened day by day. We have recorded at least 2,300 executions under the Rouhani's presidency, and in particular last year in 2015 we recorded at least 970 executions, most of them for drug-related crimes. And we continue to record executions of child offenders, which are against the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But the death penalty is not the only punishment in the Iranian regime under the Sharia law, because there is also torture, amputation, flogging, and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishments. And these are not isolated incidents, and they occur in flagrant violations of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that Iran signed and which expressly prohibits such behaviors. So I repeat, under the Rouhani's presidency, the situation of human rights, and in particular the condition of women, are are worsened, and also the position adopted by the UN General Assembly with the last resolution, but also with reports of the special rapporteurs have documented and recorded this this very critical situation, a situation that is against all the basic principle of human rights and of the international community.
Yes. Mr. Ambassador, what's your take on this?
Well, I believe that the message, which is given and not given at the same time by European and national high officials like Prime Minister Renzi, the Italian Prime Minister, and High Representative Federica Mogherini, exactly the same days when the European Union was renewing sanctions against individuals and entities in Iran for massive and grave abuses of human rights. The message which was given and not given, and I'm saying immediately why given and not given, by the highest authorities of the Italian government and the European institution is completely wrong, unfortunately. It's completely wrong because the message was not given by Prime Minister Renzi, not only mid-April when he visited Iran, but even earlier when he received President Rouhani in Rome, and was completely off mark and really downsized by High Representative Mogherini when she went to Tehran on a couple of days after Prime Minister Renzi, and together with Foreign Minister of Iran, made a press conference enumerating a number of issues which were discussed between her and the Iranian foreign minister, and she emphasized the very promising cooperation, the signature of the JCPOA agreement, the nuclear agreement, had generated between European business and Iranian business. She underlined the great perspective that exists in energy cooperation, the cooperation in environment, in migrations, in assistance to Afghan refugees in Iran, and some funding that the European Union is providing. She discussed transportation, aviation, avionics, and many other things at the end of a long shopping list of enthusiasm and positive narrative by the High Representative. There it comes all of a sudden in a very soft and subdued tone, I would say, and mention as a seventh point, she says, seventh point, we made the point of a dialogue, a frank and open dialogue on the issues of human rights. But this is completely out of tone with the report that just a couple of weeks, 3 weeks before the Secretary General of the United Nations delivered, and my friend Elisabetta Zamparutti mentioned already clearly. It is a report of really unusual clarity and strength for a document of the United Nations, which is produced in the presence, of course, of an important member of the institution of the United Nations like Iran. But nevertheless, the situation is so dire and worrisome that the report clearly states repeatedly the most serious concern of the Secretary General for the application of the death penalty, which persisted at an alarmingly high rate, including in relation to drug-related crimes and with regard to juveniles, corporal punishment, including amputation, flogging, forced blinding, applied against individuals in detention, the crackdown on journalists, on human rights defenders, in particular human rights defenders intensified as actions openly. We know how aggression in the street, use of acid and violence, large number of arrests and detained people persecuted merely because they peacefully exercised the profession of human rights defenders or their legitimate rights to freedom of expression and association. And these are the words which are used by Secretary General report. So it is a completely disconnected narrative and language, the one which is included in the report, which is a very valuable assessment of the situation in Iran, and a very soft and I would say social, diplomatically courteous tone used on a matter which is a matter of vital importance vis-à-vis the most important interlocutor, which who was Foreign Minister Zarif. So again, even more surprising from the European side, the fact that this soft tone is used only 2 days after the European Council decided to extend for another year restrictive measures against 82 people and one entity responsible of violating massively human rights. And when we are talking about 82 people responsible of violating human rights as assessed by the European Union, and these are measures which have been taken in the aftermath of 2009 street demonstrations against the flawed election, when you're talking about these 82 individuals, and we go and check in the documents of the European Commission what these people have been accused and have been found of having done against their own citizens, against Iranians, what they have done and who they are. They are top representative of the judiciary. They are very important high official of the IRGC of the Basiji force. They are people very high in the establishment of the regime, and therefore it is a strong political measure, the one undertaken by the European Council vis-à-vis Iran, adopting and reiterating these sanctions against these 82 individuals and one entity. So it is very disconcerting that the day before that happens in Brussels and the day after in Tehran, it appears to be almost forgotten. So this disconnection in not only in actions but also in words by the European institutions, it is obviously giving the impression to the Iranian authorities that there is no seriousness whatsoever on the Western side, and especially on the European side, to pursue the question of implementation of International Convention on Respect of Human Rights and individual freedom, to pursue it seriously. And therefore, implicitly, this kind of distraction from our countries in the West, it can be interpreted as a sort of a license not only to continue, but also to accelerate and to expand further the terrible behavior that the Iranian government is reserving to its own population, to minorities, to religious and ethnic minorities, and also abroad in exciting and encouraging the most terrible thing by the Shia militias in Syria and in Iraq. And we see what is happening in Aleppo. It's not a coincidence, the fact that in Aleppo there is a sort of a final solution against the city and against a rebellion which is in large part not jihadist, but is a final solution which is supported not only by Russia from the air, but also from, especially from the Iranian-supported Shia militias on the ground.
Yes. Mr. Ambassador, let me ask a follow-up question from you. Some people, especially those who believed in an appeasing policy on Iran, had hoped that there will be an improvement of human rights situation in Iran after the nuclear deal. Has this been the case, or things have worsened?
That is, in my view, is the human rights is an extremely important test case of how reliable is the Iranian government in the international commitments that is undertaking. Because if it's not reliable in a matter which is so sensible and vital as the one of respect of human rights, the right of women, really well-being, the right to life of its own people, how can we imagine that for other evidently less important matter like pure consideration of power or the interest to expand in the region or to have a higher visibility, a higher role, how can we expect that it's going to behave in a more respectable way, more acceptable more acceptable to the international community? The record, unfortunately, the record of the President Rouhani, this present government, has not been improving over the last couple of years, but from the indication, the evidences that we have, it's quite the other way around. So I am convinced that the human rights as a test case has to be pursued more aptly by the governments which are strengthening their ties for economic reasons with Iran, but it's also an area which has to be taken into close consideration when we look at the regional action that Iran is pursuing, especially in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, vis-à-vis the Gulf Cooperation Council, and also in relation another test case, which is a very evident question of adherence to international obligation and to respect of human rights, is the question of the Iranian PMOs in Camp Liberty and what is happening now at the very present moment in Camp Ashraf as well.
Yes, Ms. Zamparutti, what's your view about this?
Well, the situation is clearly deteriorated, and I can say this considering the alarming use of the death penalty, which is clearly against the United Nations General Assembly call for a universal moratorium on executions. I say this because Iran is carrying out execution of juveniles in open violation of international accords and conventions ratified by Iran. I say this if I think about the discrimination against religious minorities, particularly the Baha'i and Christians, and the legal discrimination against women, and the persecution also of sexual minorities. But I think also about the promotion, in particular, by the Supreme Spiritual Guide Khamenei, the destruction of the state of Israel. Well, I think that all these facts confirm that the situation in Iran is deteriorated during this period of negotiations, and we have to consider this when we are trying to involve Iran in the solution of the Middle East critical situation.
Yes. In the meantime, we have witnessed a number of trips to Iran by European politicians trying to improve the relationship. Everybody knows that the main incentive is trade and economy. But what is the impact on human rights situation? Has it had positive impact? Many human rights organizations point out that actually there has been more executions after these trips, and they have had adverse impact on this situation. Let us start with Ms. Zamparutti, and then I will ask Mr. Ambassador to comment.
Well, I think that there is, I don't know if in English is correct, the double face of the regime. There is the external face with the smiling face of the President Rouhani, but there is an aggressive and violent face at the internal level. And if President Rouhani is smiling when he meets representatives of the international community, Western representative of Western governments, he is showing a very violent face with the Iranian people. If we look at the number of the cruel and systematic violations of human rights inside Iran. And if we want to discuss business and economic points, questions and matters, we have to keep in mind this. We must keep in mind this point of crucial point of respect of of human rights, because if Iran doesn't, I repeat, respect basic principles of the international community, we firmly believe that he is not, it's not in a position to respect also economic and business agreements.
Mr. Ambassador, what's your view about that?
Yes, there is a side to consider in this rush of companies, European companies and Italian companies, especially to Iran and vice versa, of Iranian economic entities to Europe. Just in a matter of a few weeks, we have had a Financial Times economic forum between Europe and Iran in London beginning of March. Then there has been yesterday, I believe, in Paris, a similar forum for business between France and Iran. There is going to be in Zurich next week, next Tuesday, another forum next Wednesday, another forum for business between Europe and Iran. And I believe that this event can turn also into an opportunity, into being something which may, at the end of the day, may also be helpful if we are able, we in the sense of people who are active on the scene of the human rights situation and all the human rights defender, if we are able to acquire the support of these companies, major groups who are interested in dealing with Iran, with Iranian counterparts, to make them aware of the situation, of the deteriorating situation, the unacceptable situation of human rights. Because there are a number of things which have been overlooked after the agreement, after the signature of the JCPOA agreement. They have been completely overlooked, and they are kept somehow under the carpet. Nobody likes very much to talk about that. The narrative is that there is a very rosy opportunity, is a huge market, $150 billion we're going to be available for business. Everybody is rushing to establish line of credit and supporting contracts by national companies or multinational companies. But there are two aspects which have been up to now really neglected. I would say even completely neglected. The first one, there is a very complex network and web of sanctions, which is still in place, and is related to the activities of the IRGCs and the Hezbollah. These are things which may create considerable problems for companies which could get into the sphere, into the area of action of the IRGC related firms, which, as everybody knows, control large part of the Iranian economy. Somebody says 30%, somebody else says 50%, but the possibility, a chance that an European company could be unknowingly striking a deal with a company which is in the area of the IRGC and therefore could be considered recycling or providing some financial support to activities connected to terrorism or to the Hezbollah. Now Hezbollah is also on the terrorist list of the Gulf Cooperation Council, so it is also another element. So this aspect, in this rush to to gold, which is evident in the narrative currently accepted on how we have to push for doing business in Iran, has to be taken into a very serious consideration. But the other consideration, even more important, in my opinion, is the reputational risk. How a company with a high profile in terms of corporate responsibility, or a company which is involved worldwide in even social corporate responsibility, in putting conditions when they go on foreign markets on the fact that the right of women are respected, the children labor is avoided, and the respect of individual freedom is a condition of the kind of deals that they can strike on foreign market. How can these companies become entangled in a reality which is completely the contrary of this situation, the situation that they would like to present as responsible corporate players in the industrial world and in the modern economy? This reputational aspect, which for many years now has been one of the keybones of economic management worldwide, is another element which should be taken into account, because if it is clear that the reputational lens through which a company management sees the Iranian situation, if that lens is clear also to the other side, if the Iranians and the Iranian government becomes aware that the condition of respectability is especially a condition of doing business with Western companies, there can be a great help for the human right defenders.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, I want to raise a delicate question. If these trips don't help to improve human rights situation, then what do you propose? Should expanding relation be conditioned on improvement of human rights, like halting executions or things like that?
Well, we have to be reassured that the relations is expanding and is going to be reinforced in the economic area in a progressive way, which is parallel to the way there is an improvement on the Iranian side. If instead of an improvement we have a deterioration, there is plenty of reasons, not only for Western governments, as I said, but especially for Western companies, to wait and see, to be cautious, to wait that the evidence are changing and the trend is going in another direction, more positive direction. Because if that does not happen, the possibility of even a policy change by the American Congress, by European parliaments, and by the governments, European government, exist. And if there is a change of policy vis-à-vis Iran, concerning also the implementation, the spirit of the JCPOA, because it is true that the Iranians are trying to give a very limited and narrow interpretation of the JCPOA, but there are areas which are, as President Obama said recently, we have to look also at the spirit of the JCPOA, and therefore, for instance, testing on new missile, which with potential nuclear capability, or supporting ethnic cleansing in areas of operations in Syria or in Iraq from a militia which is led and commanded by IRGC officers. All this kind of thing may change very much the mood in the Western societies which already, even after the signature of the JCPOA, are, Gallup and Pew opinion polls carried on also during latest weeks on the vision that the Western citizens have of Iran. These polls are not favorable at all. A large majority is very much concerned by the Iranian behavior. So it is true. It would be difficult to apply a direct conditionality and a strict conditionality on striking business with Iran, but is a political leverage that we have, and it has a leverage which is even stronger when we think the GDP differentials between a country like Iran, which is below the $500 billion dollars per year of revenue, and a group of countries, if you put together the European Union and the United States, their economic potential is about 34-35 trillion. So it will not be difficult for anybody to understand that the big loss could be more felt to the Iranian side than to the Western side.
Yes, and your view, Ms. Zamparutti?
Well, I think it is important what the ambassador said before when he exposed the list of priorities of High Commissioner Mogherini. I think that the question of human rights should be a priority in the dialogue, in the meetings that Western countries have with Iran. And I think that we, as so-called democratic and developed countries, we should be coherent. There should be a coherence between our convictions and our conveniences. So this is an important point in my view.
Yes. Another question. Let's start with Ms. Zamparutti. What's the correct attitude and policy of European governments and officials in dealing with Iran, and especially on the area of human rights?
I think that there is a mistake. We are committing a mistake when we think that Iran could be part of the solution of of the problem of the human rights in Iran and in the Middle East area. We do not consider that Iran is part of the problem and is the origin of the problem. And this is really a great political mistake in our approach towards Iran.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, what's your view about this?
Well, again, it has been for at least 10, 15 years agreed among the European countries that human rights is the centerpiece and really the keystone of the European foreign and security policy. And it has been reiterated hundreds, if not thousands of times, that human rights should be so central to the European foreign and security policy that not only is enshrined in Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, but it is a specific obligation for each individual member state of the European Union to put at the center of its national foreign policy also the same priority of human rights. We are not complying. I have to say that what is happening in this story of visits to Iran and the restart of a relationship is not healthy for the European Union and for the European, if I may say a strong word, for the conscience of the Europeans. Is not healthy for our culture, for our identity, because we see that it is a key issue which is neglected. This question of the center position of human rights in foreign security policy is much more important even of the concept of working for an always and ever closer union. That is another established principle of the European integration, that Europeans have to work to create institutions which are always stronger and leading to a political union. But these institutions cannot but respect human rights, individual freedom, and the rule of law. The rule of law is extremely important. So if that comes out of the picture when we are dealing with difficult countries, quote unquote, like Iran or others, we are completely misrepresenting the very true identity of our foreign policy. They must be the first priority, of course. Played with realism. It doesn't mean that because people are hanged and there is a death penalty, which is not a moratorium decided by the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is not respected, which is already a very bad thing, not to respect a moratorium established by the General Assembly, but still we can survive with countries dealing and being very friendly also with countries which still execute people. But we cannot accept and we cannot be silent on another kind of executing policy, which is hanging a number of people every day, publicly, pulling up the cranes, provoking a torture. Practically is not even an execution anymore, is a torture in each case of this kind of hanging, and juvenile torture and all the other terrible things that we have just mentioned. We cannot remain silent on this, and our Iranian friends and our Iranian interlocutor must become accustomed to the fact that every time that they hang up, that they pull the phone, or that they see some European and so on, that these issues come automatically on the table. This is an absolute necessity that they see.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, after lifting of the sanction and releasing Iran's assets, nothing has reached the people of Iran, and they have consumed all the assets for assisting terrorist groups and spent it in Syria to keep Bashar Assad in power. What would you like to say about this to us?
Even the United Nations, a United Nations representative was not shown a particular vigor, the least I can say, in defense of human rights and in preventing and condemning the atrocities of the war, which has continued over the last couple of years, even after the Geneva process was started. Even the United Nations in the last few hours have called the bombing of Aleppo a war crime. So it is a war crime done by whom? By Assad and by the countries which are supporting the military operation, because Assad is not able to make his helicopter flying without support from Russia. Russian fighters and bombers are still there, and they have been really involved, from what we understand, also from the United Nations, in the bombing of Aleppo. 200 civilians killed. They, of course, for Assad, all the civilian killed is a terrorist. Even an infant, a 2-year child, if the moment he's killed, becomes a terrorist. So it is atrocious. Like atrocious is the question, the discovery of the trove of the Caesar pictures and documents, 80,000 people massacred and desperately tortured in the jail of the of Damascus security. All these things must come to The Hague, and there must be criminal proceeding. We have to be clear. Veto by Russia or China or anybody else in the Security Council, or non-veto, but there is a humanity law which is expanding in the international law, and we have to pursue all possible way of bringing to courts, to a proper judgment, Assad, his acolytes, and all the people who are helping him, specifically for these terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Yes. Ms. Zamparutti, last week the mullah's regime launched a campaign against improper veiling. It deployed some 7,000 so-called plainclothes morality security police agents in Tehran, tasked with monitoring women on the streets and alerting official law enforcement agencies of instances of malveiling and other violations of the mullah's fundamentalist laws. We also heard the other day about the public flogging of a woman in Iran under the Rouhani's government. She was lashed 10 times. Don't you think that women politicians from the West who visit Iran should reconsider such journeys, as they only embolden the regime in violating the most basic rights of Iranian people and women in particular? What do you think about the new wave of suppression of women in Iran?
Well, I think that we consider Iran a threat to the international security, or we have considered Iran a threat for the nuclear, but we forget, or we don't want to consider that Iran is since decades a threat, and he is in war with with the people of Iran, and the way that violation of women rights are perpetrated by the regime is something that is something that I cannot accept, I cannot really tolerate. And of course, we should react to this systematic violations of human rights. And I repeat, we should be stronger in our values, and we should firmly believe in the principle of the rule of law. And I think that this is also one of the reasons for me for supporting also the Iranian resistance, because you with the leadership of the movement by a woman. Yes, your leader is Mariam Rajavi. You express how strong you are as an alternative to the theocratic and misogynist regime of Iran. That, of course, for this link between the religious leadership and the political leadership of the Supreme Guide, I think that the regime cannot allow any respect of human rights, because the power of the Iranian regime is based on the how can I say, negazione,
denial, the
complete denial of human rights. And I believe that you, with the leadership of a woman, Mariam Rajavi, and with your platform of 10 points, you are really the only possibility for a regime change in Iran.
Yes. Let me shift the subject a little while it's still very much related. What do you think the international community, including Europe, do about residents of Camp Liberty, particularly regarding their protection and their safety? Let's start with Mr. Ambassador.
That's another issue that when 3-4 years ago, when I was in the Italian cabinet, I raised a number of times with my colleague foreign ministers, other European foreign ministers in Brussels, and there were a number of declarations on Camp Liberty, and I think it was helpful, and also in the aftermath, the subsequent Italian foreign ministers and the other European foreign ministers were able to move a little bit, not enough, just a little bit, the dynamics of this stalemate, which was happening in Camp Liberty, and number of them, although a limited number of them, was accepted and received in European countries. Not enough. I believe that also Italy, but all other major European countries should have accepted many more. We know that there are many dozens, maybe close to 100 refugees in Camp Liberty who could be selected to come to Italy, but we are now so much focused on this question of migrations that is difficult for the government and the parliament, although it should be a duty for all of us refocus on Camp Liberty, but unfortunately, knowing how the agenda or political institution goes, is difficult in this time. But there is no doubt that there have been big failures in defending Camp Ashraf before and Camp Liberty. It would have been very easy for the United Nations to set up a permanent mission, to have just a few agents, officers, under the heading of the United Nations, being present in Camp Ashraf even before, much before that terrible September 3 years ago, where we saw the disaster of the killing and the abductions of your martyrs who were killed atrociously, just because there was not only a force to defend them, but even a witness to denounce to the world. And if it had not been for the heroism or those who were in incredible conditions while they were shot at, they were able to use their cell phones to document heroically this terrible crime, the world would have ignored it. And the media were very fast in looking the other way. When something uneasy happens, the media did not, in Europe and in Italy and also in the West in general, and also the American media, they didn't pay even the minimal attention which was needed to that massacre, although they are always active and in other situations. So the question of Camp Liberty must be raised. I remember there is a denial, is another denial, which happens in Tehran when the issue is raised. Myself, I had an opportunity on occasion, especially to mention this question to an Iranian official, even after having left the government. And again, there is no, we know very much that disinformation and the way of telling a story which is very far from the truth is frequent in that part of the world. That's why we have to overcome the denials and to raise this issue constantly. But I believe that the High Commissioner for the Refugees should also be more involved, and I hope that the demarches that I'm sure that the resistance is making with the United Nations could clear the way to establish a stronger protection of Camp Liberty. And let me take this opportunity to send a very warm wish to the residents of Camp Liberty, to our friends there, that their tragedy could be resolved quickly and in full safety.
And your view, Ms. Zamparutti?
Well, we know how strong and also courageous was Ambassador Terzi when acting as Foreign Affairs Minister, posed the question of the refugees in Camp Liberty. And I think that we have a great responsibility in not considering the problem of the 2,000 people in Camp Liberty, because there were, since the memorandum was signed when they moved from Ashraf to Camp Liberty, there were international responsibilities to find a resettlement for them. I really hope that not only the United Nations, of course, but also the United States may support and may be stronger in supporting a solution for all the people living in Camp Liberty, in particular in that very critical moment. And the European Union, the European countries were not strong enough to accept a relevant number of them, because we know that also Italy accepted some of them for humanitarian reasons. Well, I think that we have to do a jump, a step, because we have to consider the question of Camp Liberty not only as a humanitarian question, but as a political question. And I think that is the problem. And this is the reason why just now a clear solution has not been adopted, and around 2,000 people are in Camp Liberty now.
Yes, and let me finish by asking you about the grand meeting of the Iranian opposition in July 9. What do you think it is important, and what message would it convey to policymakers globally, including the ones in Europe? First, Mr. Ambassador.
This meeting is the first grand meeting which takes place in the aftermath of the signature ratification, the JCPOA. And I believe that there can be two very, very important messages. Just the fact of getting together with all the friends you have, the resistance has all over the world, is an incredibly forceful statement of will. So I think that the fact of having big part of the international community, the civil societies, which are involved in defense of human rights, is extremely important. But the message, I think, should be, in my opinion, once again, but even more now, in the aftermath of the nuclear agreement, should be the fact that the resistance represents a clear alternative to the regime, but not in the sense that is a large group of Iranian people who would like to come to power for the sake of coming to power and benefiting of policies which in many countries are only matter of corruption, personal pride, individual powers, and so on. But the alternative that the resistance is proposing is an alternative of values, is an alternative of freedom, of constitutional rights, is an alternative which is based, as Honorable Zamparutti was saying, on assessing the rule of law and assessing the fact that it is the voice of the people which must be heard by those in power. This is the true alternative, and it's not by chance that the 10 points which have been proposed and reiterated a number of times by Mrs. Mariam Rajavi include the exclusion of the death penalty, which is very significant. It shows how advanced is this concept of society, which is presented as an alternative to the obscurities of the fundamentalists who would like to say be those fundamentalists adhering to an Islamic interpretation or another, be they Sunni or Shia, fundamentalists that don't accept modernity and don't accept that the representation of people must be done on terms of accountability, good politics, and honesty.
Yes. Ms. Zamparutti, what do you think about this question?
Well, I totally agree with Ambassador Terzi and with what he said. You are the alternative. You are the concrete alternative. You are the most organized group, the most consistent group, and the most supported group by those who believe in the rule of law. And I think that the moment is that you are recognized, as I already said, at political level as a group and with have a political dialogue. And I think that it's very, very important also the role of media. I really hope that media may inform the international public opinion about on what you are, on what Mariam Rajavi is, and on your program and your project, your political approach, and I repeat, on the force of your organization and of the international support you have. This, in my opinion, is something that we have also to work with, and I will try to help you also on this aspect.
Thank you. Now we have come to the end of this session, our online conference. I would like to take this opportunity to once again Ambassador Terzi and Ms. Zamparutti for taking the time to participate in this conference. I found it enlightening and informative. I hope those who have watched it online or joined through internet have found it to be the same. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a good weekend.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The same to you, and best things to all your viewers. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.